Okay, picture this. You're in a meeting, right? With a bunch of international colleagues. You've got this brilliant idea. It's your time to shine, but you completely freeze up, terrified to speak up in English.
Sounds familiar. Yeah. You're definitely not the only one.
Not even close. But that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We're tackling this fear of speaking English head on. And I mean, you guys sent in a ton of material, articles, even YouTube videos. We've got it all ready to go.
We've got a lot to work with. Some of them are practical advice, right? Others are more like personal stories, how people overcame this. We've even got some sources that go deep into the psychology of fear.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So by the end of this deep dive, we want you to walk away with two things. First, a whole toolbox of strategies to feel more confident speaking English. But also, we want to get into the why. Like, why does this fear even exist in the first place? Why does it hold so many people back?
It's like, first we're going to break down the fear, see what it's made of, and then we're going to give you the tools to, like, totally dismantle it.
Dismantle it. I like that. So something that all our sources agree on, this fear, it's super common. Tons of people experience it. It's not a sign of weakness or anything.
Right, yeah, and they pinpoint a lot of the same anxieties, like making mistakes, worrying about being judged, even those negative experiences from the past that kind of stick with you. But there's this deeper layer, too, and I found it fascinating.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So several sources mention this idea of bella figura. It's Italian. Basically, it means you got to present this polished, perfect image. And then there's brutta figura, which is like the opposite. It's that fear of messing up, showing your imperfections.
Right, I see where you're going with this. So, like, if you're always trying to achieve this bella figura, does that actually make it harder to learn a language?
That's exactly it. To learn anything new, you got to be okay with making mistakes. It's part of the process. But this pressure to be perfect all the time, it creates this massive mental block. People are so scared of making a brutta figura that they just avoid speaking altogether.
It's true, and that fear can be even worse when you think about public figures, speaking English on a global stage.
Oh, it reminds me of Ana Botella, the former mayor of Madrid.
Oh, yeah. What happened there again?
So she presented Madrid's bid for the Olympics in English, and people just went after her accent. Huge media frenzy. Brutal.
Wow. Intense. It really shows you, though, how much pressure there is to sound native, right?
And how harsh people can be. It's almost like they're just discouraging people from even trying.
Yeah.
But hey, the good news is our sources have a ton of practical advice on how to deal with this.
Okay, let's dive into that. What are some concrete things people can start doing today to build their confidence?
Well, active listening is key. A lot of experts talk about that. Basically, immerse yourself in the sounds of English. Movies, podcasts, music, anything. It helps train your ear to recognize those natural rhythms, how English is actually spoken.
So it's not just about speaking, it's about absorbing the language from all sides.
Yeah, exactly. And one source actually suggested this technique called shadowing, where you listen to a short audio clip in English, and then you try to, like, perfectly mimic the speaker, their intonation, pronunciation, everything, almost like you're their shadow.
Interesting. I can see how that would be helpful to pick up on those subtleties.
Right. And then we've got the classic fake it till you make it, which, believe it or not, has some science behind it.
Really? I always thought that was just like a motivational saying.
Nope. Studies show that even if you're nervous, just smiling can actually make you feel better. And it projects confidence, too.
So, like, tricking your brain into feeling braver. Interesting. Any other tricks like that?
Yeah, for sure. One that sounds a bit weird is slow down when you speak.
I get how rushing can make you sound less confident, but wouldn't speaking slowly feel unnatural?
Not if you do it right. Speaking slowly gives you time to think, choose your words carefully. It actually makes you sound more in control, more confident, and helps the other person understand you better, too. Think about, like, the best speakers you've heard, they often use pauses. That slower pace draws people in.
That's so true. It's not about speed, it's about delivering your message in a clear and powerful way. What about, like, mental techniques? Anything there?
Definitely. A bunch of sources mention visualization. Athletes use it all the time to prepare for competition.
So instead of picturing yourself messing up, you picture yourself speaking smoothly, confidently.
Exactly. By mentally rehearsing those scary situations, you're training your brain to react differently in real life, building new pathways that link speaking English with positive feelings instead of that anxiety.
Makes sense. It seems like a lot of these strategies are about being in control of your, like, internal state, your mind and body.
You got it. It's about mastering those automatic responses to fear so you can actually focus on communicating. Oh, and speaking of mastering your internal state, one source had a cool idea. What if you reframed your fear as excitement?
Wait, how is that even possible? Aren't they totally different?
Well, physically, they're super similar. Think about it. Both fear and excitement make your heart race. You might get sweaty palms, adrenaline pumping. The difference is how you interpret those sensations.
You don't get rid of the physical response, you change how you think about it.
Exactly. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm terrified, think I'm pumped, I'm about to do something awesome. That shift can make a huge difference. And of course, those physical symptoms, those can be managed too.
For sure. I imagine things like deep breathing or relaxation techniques could come in handy.
Oh yeah, tons of suggestions for calming your nerves and the sources. Simple breathing exercises, those can work wonders when you feel that anxiety creeping up.
It's like hitting pause on that fear response. One last practical tip that really resonated with me: celebrating small wins.
Ah, yes. That is so important, especially with something like language learning. It's a big challenge. It's easy to get discouraged if you're always focused on how much you still have to learn.
So instead of looking at the whole mountain ahead, you appreciate the steps you've already taken.
Precisely. Keep a list of things you're already good at in English. Maybe you have a great vocabulary, or you're awesome at understanding people when they speak. Remind yourself of your progress, no matter how small. It's incredibly motivating.
I love that. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of practical tactics to boost confidence, but what about the long term? What kind of mindset shifts can help people really conquer this fear over time?
That's where things get really interesting. That's where we go deep.
Lead the way. I'm ready to dive in.
All right, let's do it. So one of the biggest mindset shifts is learning to embrace those mistakes. See them as opportunities to learn.
Instead of every error being like a total failure, it's more like stepping stones on the way to fluency.
That's a great way to put it. Think about it. When you were learning to ride a bike, did you just, like, hop on and ride perfectly?
Definitely not. Lots of falls, probably some scraped knees.
Exactly. But each time you got back up, you learned something. Same with language.
Great analogy. It kind of takes the pressure off, Like you don't have to be perfect from day one.
Right. And speaking of pressure, another big one is that fear of judgment. Often we think people are judging us way harsher than they actually are.
It's like having this inner critic just, constantly putting you down.
Oh, yeah. That inner critic can be brutal. But what if we challenged it? Like, is it really true? Are people really judging me that harshly?
So it's about shifting that perspective, looking for the positive, I guess.
Exactly. And remember, most people are way more forgiving than we think. They get it. Learning a language is tough. They're impressed by the effort, honestly.
Especially in today's world, right? So interconnected.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Which brings us to something that comes up a lot: accents. There's this idea that speaking English with an accent is a bad thing.
It goes back to that Bella Figura thing, right? Wanting to sound perfectly native.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Everyone has an accent. It's what makes your voice unique. So instead of trying to erase it, focus on speaking clearly.
That makes so much more sense. It's about getting your message across, not trying to sound like someone else.
Exactly. Your accent is part of you, part of your story. Embrace it. And then, of course, we got to talk about practice, practice, practice.
No shortcuts to fluency?
Nope. It's all about consistency, even if it's just a few minutes every day. And it doesn't have to be formal study or anything.
Some of the sources suggested things like language exchange programs, online classes, or even just chatting with a friend who's patient.
Exactly. Find ways to use the language in real-life situations. Oh, and speaking of real life, one source had this funny idea for getting over the fear of making mistakes.
Okay, I'm curious now.
They said, go to a store, like a hardware store, and ask for something totally ridiculous, like groceries.
That's hilarious, but I see what they're getting at.
Yeah, it's about, like, purposely making a mistake in a low-stakes environment. You realize it's not the end of the world. It's a form of exposure therapy.
Facing that fear head on, taking away its power.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it reinforces the idea that mistakes are okay, they're part of learning. So we've talked about tips, mindset shifts, the importance of practice, but let's zoom out for a second. Why are we even doing all this? Like, what does conquering this fear really do for you?
Good question. It's more than just the language, right?
Right. It opens up so many doors in your career, relationships, even just when you travel. It helps you grow as a person.
Expands your horizons.
Exactly. One source talked about how even if you're not perfectly fluent, communicating effectively can create these incredibly powerful moments in your life.
Like having a real conversation with someone from a different culture or giving a presentation that really inspires people.
Yes. Those are the moments that make it all worthwhile. And beyond those external things, there's a feeling of empowerment that comes from facing this fear.
Proving to yourself that you can do hard things, that you can achieve your goals.
Yeah, and building resilience, being able to adapt to new situations, and the courage to be yourself, to express yourself authentically.
It's recognizing that your voice matters, that you have something to say.
And those are qualities that go way beyond language. They help you in every aspect of life. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm curious, what resonated most with you?
There's so much to think about. I'm definitely going to try that shadowing technique. It seems like a great way to work on pronunciation.
That's a good one. I think the idea of reframing fear as excitement really stuck with me. Like, just changing how you think about those feelings can make a huge difference.
I agree. It's super powerful. It reminds me of something I was thinking about while we were going through all these sources. It wasn't stated directly, but it felt like an underlying theme.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
I think a lot of this comes down to shifting from perfection to connection.
I love that.
Like remembering that communication is about building bridges between people. It's about sharing ideas, experiences, emotions, and that goes beyond words.
Absolutely. And it means being okay with those imperfect moments, the stumbles, the silences. It's all part of it.
When you let go of that need to be perfect, that's when real connection happens.
So true. And it makes me think about something else, something important for all of us as we're living in this increasingly multilingual world. Think about a time you met someone whose English wasn't perfect. Maybe they struggled to find the right words or they had a strong accent, but they were trying. They wanted to communicate.
Reminds me of when I was traveling and I met this local. His English was limited, but he was so excited to share his culture. It was hard to understand everything, but his energy was just so positive. One of the most memorable parts of that trip.
Exactly. I bet you remember that interaction way more than any conversation with someone who spoke perfect English.
Definitely. It was the connection that made it special.
And that's my point. How can we, as individuals, as a society, make things easier for people learning languages? How can we shift from judging accents and fluency to celebrating the effort, the courage it takes to communicate across those boundaries?
It's about creating a space where people feel safe to make mistakes, to learn, to connect, even if they're not perfect.
Yeah. It's about empathy, understanding, encouraging each other. And I think that's something we can all do, whether we're learning languages ourselves or interacting with people who are.
Because in the end, it's about connection, not perfection. That's a powerful message.
It is. So to everyone listening, as you continue on your journey with English, know that you're not alone.
We're all in this together, and we're rooting for you.
Keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep speaking up.
Your voice matters,
Yeah.
and we want to hear it. And imagine a world where we all spoke that language fluently. Empathy and encouragement.
Wouldn't that be something?
It really would. This has been such a great deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure, honestly. I always enjoy these conversations so much. And it's inspiring to see how engaged our listeners are with this topic.
Yes. And speaking of our listeners, we want to hear from you. What really stood out to you in this deep dive? What are you excited to try out?
Share your thoughts with us. Social media, voice messages, whatever works for you. We might even feature your insights in a future episode.
We love hearing your perspectives, learning from your experiences, because really the best learning happens when we all share.
That's so true. So until next time, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep speaking up.
Most importantly, yeah. And remember, every time you speak English, you're doing more than just using a language.
You're sharing a part of yourself with the world.
Such a great reminder. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time.